Our guest tonight is Charles Chaplin, whose many-sided experience of the cinema covers most of its history. A star before the First World War and a star today, he's come along this evening to talk things over with a distinguished team drawn from the film world over here. The chairman is Robert Mackenzie, and here he is to introduce the program.
Mr. Chaplin, I'd like to begin with a very warm word of welcome. I think in the 3 weeks since you arrived, you must have sensed that all of us, the people of London and of the whole country, have been delighted to have you and your charming wife and family here in our midst. And every one of us will be hoping that you're enjoying your stay, and we hope, too, that you'll stay just as long as possible, and you'll come back much more frequently in the future.
Very kind of you. Very kind of you.
Well, there's certainly very little that I need to say by way of formal introduction to Mr. Chaplin. For most of us, film-goers and critics alike, as this morning's papers show, his reputation is unique. His new film, Limelight, is a drama, but since he first began making films in 1913, Mr. Chaplin has, I suppose, brought more laughter into the world than anyone ever has before. Tomorrow evening is the world premiere of Limelight, and we're very pleased that he's come along this evening to discuss with us his experiences of the cinema over the past 40 years. To talk things over with him, we've a distinguished team of four. Two of them are film critics. Miss Dilys Powell of the Sunday Times, Paul Holt of the Daily Herald. Then, on the production side, Sir Michael Balcon, production head of Ealing Studios, who's been engaged in filmmaking himself since 1920. Most of us recall with pleasure such films as Passport to Pimlico, Kind Hearts and Coronets, and Scott of the Antarctic. He's now at work on a film of the famous novel, The Cruel Sea. The final member of the team is John Mills. We all know his fine work on stage and screen, In Which We Serve, Great Expectations, Sir Michael's own film, Scott of the Antarctic, and incidentally, John Mills has a premiere of his own coming off in a few weeks' time, The Gentle Gunman. Well, that's our team, and I need only add, I think, that our program is unscripted and unrehearsed. Dilys Powell, would you like to lead off?
Yes, indeed. I should like to ask Mr. Chaplin. It's a long time since...
May I interrupt? Could you just call me Charlie?
Oh, may I? Yes, please, I'd love to.
Right.
Well, Charlie, will you tell us what you feel on coming back to London after so long? It's 20 years since you were here before. We've been through a great deal. Things must have changed. What are your impressions of London now?
Well, first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity just to express my deep gratitude to the English people for their wonderful, affectionate, loving, and marvelous welcome they've given me, coming back to my home town, as it were. And I want to take this occasion just to tell you how much I appreciate it. I know there's been a little remiss in some of the mail and so forth. We've been inundated with mail. We've had sacks and sacks and sacks of it. And it's very difficult to answer it all at once. But sooner or later, I hope that I'll be able to answer every one of them.
What changes do you notice from the London you knew before, Mr. Chaplin?
Oh, there's many changes. Of course, my feelings, as you say, Miss Powell, were one of excitement, frustration, bewilderment, a little sadness, and a great deal of gladness, of course. Of course, London, one thinks of London as being very staid and very calm and so forth. But there's an excitement underneath, a vitality which really lifts one off its feet. And I felt that. I see lots of changes. Naturally, I was shocked when I saw Waterloo Bridge, that beautiful, slick, modern, very fine utility bridge. But I prefer the old Waterloo Bridge, you know, with... it was a noble structure, and then, I'm getting sentimental, I suppose. I suppose it's a case of we can't stand still. No, nothing is permanent, not even trouble.
Well, we're used to hearing these things said about New York, all this vitality and vigor, but what do you mean exactly when you say that about London?
Well, when I was here in 21, you see, I saw the shops and they weren't filled, there were the lack of goods and so forth. And then I saw the children, the little pasty faces and so forth. And there was a certain sort of melancholy about the place. It was after the war, and it was very sad, and it touched me deeply, and one felt frustrated about it. But coming back, I look at the children now, they have their rosy cheeks, and they have confidence, and they're full of vitality and virility, and it's very, very stimulating. It's very heartening. And then I feel that in the gate and the tempo of the town. I feel that there's a resurgence, something that's happened to England. You know, you've suffered, you've tightened your belt, and of course I'm not in a position to be so optimistic, having lived in the United States where we have plenty. But I think all this, what you've gone through, is really a great has a great spiritual advantage. I think it shows the stamina, and there's a rebirth. There's as I said, a resurgence, and I feel that. I don't know what the optimism is. I'm not thoroughly aware of the situation, not too at the present moment. But I do feel this wonderful spirit, and I know you've been very low, and as I said before, nothing is permanent. I'm sure you're bound to go up. You know, when we reach the bottom of the well, there's only one place to go: is up.
That's good.
And I feel that very much. Of course, I'm speaking of instinctively.
Paul Holt.
Now, Charlie, there was a real reason then for you making the scene of your latest film, London.
That was the nostalgia more than anything else. I felt I wanted to say something. You see, in this torrid times of hate and war and so forth and suspicion, I wanted to produce something of kindliness, something about humanity, something about human kindness, which I've experienced a great deal since my return to England. And that I've tried to express in my film. I've tried to express the man's kindness to his fellow men. And I don't say that literally because my kindness is to a young ballet dancer. But nevertheless, it's all there, all the humanity I've tried to bring out, to articulate. And that's why I did this film, more or less. I gave it the English background because I thought it was appropriate.
It has a different character from your earlier films, even from Monsieur Verdoux, which in itself was a change from your first films. For the first time, I think you're playing a dramatic role. Now, are you going to develop that kind of movement in your films? Are you going to leave behind the old Charlie altogether and move forward to always to serious films?
Well, thank goodness I can't predict anything. No, I haven't any plans at all in that nature. I would say that it's a great adventure. You see, I think anybody creating something new must have an adventure. And after 40 years in the film, doing that little character, you know, I have to have my holiday, you see.
Well, I'd like to see you make 3 pictures a year, Charlie, really. I think we really need an awful lot of films from you. I think that we need a great many pictures. I think you should work all the time and never have a holiday.
Well, I'm a very, very lazy man, and I don't know whether to kiss you or kick you.
But do you find that people expect the old Charlie? Do you think it's a slight disadvantage to vis-à-vis the audience, that people expect a different kind of film from you?
I'm afraid, yes, there is that complication. There is that business of being slightly disappointed when they see you without, when they see me, at least, without the big feet and the baggy pants.
I don't think they'll be disappointed when they see Limelight.
Oh, thank you. Modesty forbids that I say anything about that. I know you've seen it, and I appreciate your review.
Sir Michael, the suggestion was made not altogether seriously, I suspect, that Mr. Chaplin might consider making 3 films a year. This, I think, brings us in a way to this question of the problem that you must be very much aware of trying to produce a film in this one-man job of the sort that Mr. Chaplin does. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Well, I have some comment, of course. The job of a film producer is to organize teams of filmmakers. Well, one-man teams are quite unique. I haven't got them. I haven't got such teams. I suppose that is genius. Well, it must be. We have made a modest contribution towards in the comedy field, with you to say whether it was better to have waited till the genius comes along, or go ahead and make 2 or 3 films organizing various people to help me to make them. I really don't know. It's other people to say. I'd love to be able to make a film with a genius.
Well, now I'm becoming very embarrassed. I know you're not referring to me. I don't quite know. That's a much abused term, genius. We have many of them in Hollywood. And I don't quite know the definition of a genius. Some people say it's the capacity for taking pains and so forth, etc. And all those hackneyed things have been said. But I think genius is a genius is an individual stylist who does things remarkably well, or conscientiously, or remarkably well, I would say. But I don't count. I think all those sort of terms are not particularly important. The thing is, what the public want to see is a good job, and we try to do our best. And I must say that I've never written down to the public in my life. I always believe that anything it's the best that my particular shaped head knows how to do, and I always aspire to do the best I can for the public.
Doesn't it make you feel?
Sorry, hold.
Doesn't it make you feel a little bit embarrassed to be called genius every time you're talked to?
Oh, no, I'm shameless.
I'm sorry if I used the wrong term, but could anybody help me to find somebody who would write a film, direct a film, do the choreography, write the music? It'd be a wonderful thing if somebody would do it for me, because my job would be so much simpler. But you'd have to find a lot of people for me.
Well, you know what they say, jack of all trades and master of none.
Well, how on earth do you manage to do it? I think that's a question that would fascinate all of us. Now, we know that your new film is done, as in that sense, almost a one-man job. Now, how does one go about it? I mean, it must be a tremendous, overwhelming task to carry the whole load.
Well, I think Miss Bauer would have to write a book about that, because I don't really quite know. I know this, that I'm very uneasy if other people do it for me.
You take a long time in preparing, I imagine. It's a very long job.
Well, this particular film, it took me a year and a half to write. You know, after the redactions and so forth, and getting down to the final. I wrote practically 750 pages, which was reduced to about 130.
But at least you have the satisfaction of controlling the whole thing.
That's the whole. Yes. You see, I'm sure there's plenty of other people could do that sort of thing, but they haven't. They're not so flourishing in the Pence Halfpenny department. It requires one's own finances to do it.
I think that's a very generous thing to say, Charlie.
Oh, but it's perfectly true. I know there's a lot of capable men. There's a lot of brains here and a lot of brains in Hollywood. And if they were given the chance, I think, to do those sort of things. But of course, after all, it's an industry, and it's a tremendous investment.
And time is an element.
And time, and of course, and when somebody is putting up their money for somebody else to express their whims, you see, well, it becomes a serious business.
Well, one aspect of the thing I think is fascinating is the fact that you've composed the music. I wonder, Paul Holt, would you like to look at that aspect of filmmaking?
Well, yes, I do want to ask you about that, because we have suffered for so long from the music, the background music, being dominant to the film and pointing the mood all the time. How important do you think that is, and how false can it be?
Oh, it's very important, music. You see, I use it as a counterpoint, and I learnt that from the Fred Karno company. They had splendid music. For instance, if they had a squalor surroundings with a lot of comedy tramps working in it, then, you see, they would have very beautiful boudoir music, something of the 18th century, very lush and very grandioso, just purely as satirical and as a counterpoint. And I've copied a great deal from Mr. Fred Karno in that direction.
Well, I'd like to make a point about that, because the film Kind Hearts and Coronets was mentioned. Well, that was directed by a very talented director, Robert Hamer, who, of course, wrote the script and directed it. But, of course, when it came to the music, he relied on Mozart. Do you think he was wrong to do that?
Well, I'm not in a position to say there, because you can't go far wrong with Mozart. He's a pretty good musician also, you know. There's very few of us left.
I wonder if we could turn to look at acting for a moment. John Mills, I'm sure you're interested in this whole business.
Yes, there's one question I would like to ask you, Charlie. Your opinion. You in my opinion, are the greatest comedian I've ever seen. I don't want any money tonight. Tomorrow would do. But you've made me laugh for years. There's one particular thing that I've been most impressed with always, apart from the sincerity that you always bring to it. I would like to ask you about timing. This particular point about the timing, when I see your comedy in a picture, even going back to the very old ones, all your routines seem to me as if you've been able to play them to the Palladium, with a full house, so that a great comedian that you are knows how to handle them, how long to go on, when to stop, when people are getting bored. And it seems to me that you never go on too long, and I wondered if you have any way of telling about your the comedy.
Timing?
Yes.
In comedy.
For the screen.
My mother gave me that. I was born with it, more or less. And she was very graceful and was a dancer, And naturally, I suppose, those things are more or less instinctive. It's the same thing with acting. I don't think you can teach a person to act. You can make them effective and know how to use their acting.
I think that I haven't made myself clear. I mean timing, of knowing how many gags to put together so that you don't miss too many laughs. I mean, in the theatre, if you play a line, you wait for the laugh and then time the next one. But on the screen, it's very much more difficult. And you seem to have got it absolutely taped. I wondered whether...
Well, I think that's imagination, imagining the duration and the sense of values, I suppose, and everything else.
Yes.
And it's more or less instinctive. It's instinctive.
In other words, you feel how long they should possibly be able to laugh before the next thing happens.
Oh, a camera is more terrifying than even talking here before 40 million people.
I do know.
I suppose your early music hall experience, in that sense, gave you a real sense of how an audience reacts, and which could be carried over to the films. Or
I think you have to... no, that's entirely something different. The marriage of an audience, the presence of an audience, and one's contact is something entirely different. With the camera, there's a cold, round eye just watching you. And you have to rely on your own imagination and your own sense of proportion of what you... and timing, what a thing deserves, or what a thing should have in the way of time and so forth, and pausing and all that.
You supervise, of course, the assembly and the cutting of the film.
Oh, yes, I do it all. Unfortunately, yes.
It helps you with the timing, too?
Yes, that's also something of... then, of course, that's something visual. You see it. And, there it is. You're confronted with it. But, I mean, in actually taking a scene, there is a tendency for everybody to speed up. But I think there's getting too much speed. I like to dally a little bit, and just get the audience to know you a little bit. And that's what I think I've done in this film. I've tried to pause for a moment, and so that people and the audience and the characters can get acquainted. Of course, I wouldn't advise that in every film.
Well, Gillis and I have seen your film, and we thought that the man up there on the screen wasn't really Calvero, it was you. It was you exploring your own ideas. How true is that?
Well, yes, my ideas. So I've heard it, and it's been publicized that this is more or less autobiographical. But it really isn't. I think it's more or less revealing of what... It's a portrait, It's like Shakespeare gives a very good account of himself. Not that I'm coupling myself with Shakespeare when I say this. Please forgive me, 40 million people out there, my friends out there. But nevertheless, I think his work gives a true account of the man. And I think my work, the tramp and the baggy shoes and all that false nonsense and all his inhibitions and everything else, and his desires and aims and his desire for beauty and for everything else, that's something that we all, I don't care how lowly we are and what station of life, we all want the beautiful.
But are the incidents in your new film based on incidents that occurred in your early experiences in music hall, or that others had happened to them? I mean, how do you accumulate these things you've worked into the film?
Oh, I think that, the accumulation of those things, they're spontaneous in writing. Years ago in the silent days, I used to write with the camera.
How do you mean write with the camera?
Well, I never had anything prepared, you see. I would get on a set and would start early in the cold morning with all those ugly electricians looking at me saying, well, what are you going to do next? Pardon me, please. But they were always present. And then you'd start. And you'd get excited, and out of excitement would come invention. And I think all creative work is done out of excitement and enthusiasm. And we just start that way, you see. And now, of course, now that the industry has become such a financial sort of adventure, we have to have everything prepared. I'm rather sorry for that in a way. The same thing as I had to do with this present picture. It's all prepared. It took me 3 years to prepare it.
You can't have a talking picture, of course, without preparation, can you? Do you regret the silent days? Are you happy
now?
Yes.
Oh, I used to direct, yes. You see, you talked about you wanted me. May I interrupt you? I was just thinking about doing 3 pictures a year. Well, my contract with the Keystone Company was for 3 pictures a week. Oh, no. And as a matter of fact, I for the first year there, I made 2 pictures in one day. They were 2 shorts, what we called educational. And for those extra pictures, I got $25.
You can't do 2 a day, Sir Michael.
I was wondering whether we've gone forward or backwards.
Well, there's one aspect of this whole question of the new development of the films since your early days, 2 pictures a day and all that. And Doris Powell, I wonder if you'd like to explore this whole question of star values and so on.
Yes, I should like to ask about the star system. In the 40 years we're talking about, we've all seen the star system growing up. Do you think it's a good thing that people should be idolized? We're all very glad to idolize you, but we're not always so glad to idolize all the other actors and actresses we see. Do you think the star system is a good thing, this elevation of one personality, perhaps not an actor or an actress, but a personality?
When you say elevation, who's supposed to elevate him? You see, after all, of course, yes, there you see, again, nothing can transcend human personality. You know, a story is all secondary, is purely a background in which this precious thing called personality functions. That's my belief. That's my concept of pictures. The idea of getting somebody that has personality, distinction, somebody that the people can look at and identify themselves with.
Sir Michael, in your experience, is that the trend, too, in filmmaking here, or do you approach it differently?
I would like to debate that with Mr. Chaplin, but of course it would have to be on a separate occasion, you know. I am firmly convinced that if you have a first-class story, you can, with a first-class story, produce a first-class personality. And I've seen many good personalities ruined through bad choices of story. And I think a story is a very, very important factor in filmmaking.
Oh, yes.
Again, you know,
yes, I agree.
Again, you know, I must say that, you know, we're at the feet of the master.
Yes. But you said yourself, you see, may I interrupt here at this moment? Because you said yourself, it's all for the purpose of exploiting that personality. That's all. That's what a story does. In other words, the story is the framework in order to bring out and make luminous the personality.
Well, now, I'm going to be very wicked and bring a star in on this. The relationship between the star and the personality, John Mills, what is it? The star and the story. What is the relationship? I mean, does one feel oneself inevitably carried by the story, or what?
Well, I've always tried to consider myself first an actor. I prefer being called an actor to a star. And since I've been acting 24 years, I think, I have tried to hang on to that and not be typed. I think that typing is a thing that I think is a very, very bad thing indeed, and I've tried to ring the changes. So I don't know that I could really answer that particular star point. I would like to be considered as an actor, I think, really, first and foremost.
Doris Powell?
I would like to ask whether there's been a difference in personality since the silent films, whether personalities weren't, in general, more powerful in the days of the silent films than they are now when you have a written story with written dialogue.
I think they are. In the old days, you see, the public used to fill in. I don't think anybody has been as famous as Mary Pickford, America's Sweetheart, and so forth. I think there's so much left to the imagination. There was there were shadows. There was a poetry to the whole concept of these people. They were like, they were something they were unreal. They were in the realms of poetry and fairyland, you might say. And they never were an actual reality. Now there's so much that is realistic that there's very little left to the imagination.
And you think something has been lost in that process?
Oh, yes, I think the poetry of the theatre has been lost. You see, I think art form is only really a great form by virtue of its limitations. It's like painting in 2 dimensions. You get your great masters, like Rembrandt and so forth. And it's the same thing in the silent films, you see. The moment we put language to them, they heard and it was vocal and audible, and we heard, we had some very bad experiences, or very dull ones at least. Although I must say, I think there's a tremendous... We could never go back to those old days where I think I romanticize about them, but as a matter of fact, there's great progress in films today.
Has there been a change in the position of the audience? Paul Holt, I wonder, you sat in probably as many films and watched them as any film critic has to do. I wonder if you ever had curiosity about the role of the audience in relation to the film.
Well, I feel very strongly that I'd like to ask Charlie whether the audience participation, the audience playing a part in the show, is gaining too much control of entertainment, not of films, but of entertainment generally. If people are playing their part, whereas the entertainer really has to do his own job.
I didn't quite understand. Pardon me, my brain, I was wandering for that moment. Would you kindly...
Would you mind saying it all again?
Isn't it awful? Isn't it terrible of me?
When you call somebody up to the stage to play the part with you,
yes,
is that a good thing?
No, I don't. No, I like the separation.
Completely...
Oh, yes, I like an austerity. I think it's more of an art. I love the footlights, the rostrum. I like the presentation. I remember when I played the Duke of York's Theatre as a little boy, there was a young man from college, very naive and very charming, and said to me, when he was introduced to Billy and Sherlock Holmes, he said, "I didn't know such a person exists in real life." And I thought that was so wonderful. Yes. That's the true romance of the theatre. Yes. That Tree and Sir Henry Irving and all those great illustrious figures really didn't exist in actual life. They were something else.
It was the magic, the real magic.
It was the magic, it was the real magic. I think we know too much about people.
And still I gathered from something you said earlier to me that you don't believe that you should be a slave of the audience, that you don't give them merely again and again what they want, but what you feel they should have to some extent.
Yes, I remember years ago, very early in my career, a man used to write to me very laudatory things about my work and all that sort of thing. And he would say to me, "Charlie, as I've noticed what you're doing now, you're becoming outre." Outre. It's not bad for Lambeth, is it? But he used to say to me, "You're becoming a little, you're overdoing things, you're sweating." He said, "At one time the public were a slave to you and your work." He said, "Now you've become a slave to them." And I've always remembered that, so that's why I've sort of more or less tried to rely on myself and what pleases me.
Well, our time is almost up, but there's just one last question. In a phrase or two, if you could do it all over again, Charlie, would you do anything different from what you have done?
Oh, no. No, I don't want to even go back. I just want to keep going forward.
Well, that's very good to hear. And I'm afraid our time is up now. And I do want to thank the 4 members of our team who've been putting questions to Mr. Chaplin. And above all, of course, I want to thank Charlie himself. You've been most generous in coming along to chat with us. And I do wish you the very best of success, and I know all of us do, for your opening night of Limelight. And I'm going to remind you again of something you didn't quite commit yourself to, that we expect to see a good deal more of you in the years ahead than we have in recent years. We want you back often.
Thank you so much. I certainly will come back.
Well, that's a promise. Good night.
Our guest in that program was Charles Chaplin. The other contributors were Sir Michael Balcon, John Mills, Dilys Powell, and Paul Holt. The chairman was Robert Mackenzie. The broadcast was one of the Light program's special series of interviews with prominent people.